When Hurricane Sandy hit New York in 2012, the city was practically wiped off the map. Waves reached 15 feet high, flooding the subway, trains, tunnels, and dozens of neighborhoods. 44 people died, and the damage exceeded $19 billion. In Rockaway and Staten Island, the ocean literally devoured the coast. The sand was washed away, the beaches vanished, and houses were left standing on bare concrete almost in the water. Where people used to stroll, there was now just sloshing mud. And naturally, people began to wonder, what's next? What happens if something like Sandy or even stronger comes again? The answer was weird. Local activists, supported by the government, decided to dump animal remains into the bay. But not just any animals, ones that had already proven to be effective in rebuilding infrastructure. Let's see what that means. Oyster capital. Today, New York is associated with skyscrapers, yellow cabs, and the smell of coffee on every corner. But just a couple of centuries ago, the city was filled with a very different scent, salty and marine, coming from billions of oysters. That's right. Before it became a concrete jungle, New York was the world's oyster capital. When Europeans first arrived here in the 17th century, the Manhattan Bay was literally teeming with life. On the seabed lay entire mountains of oysters, so huge that ships had to navigate carefully to avoid running aground on shell reefs. According to historians, about half of all oysters on Earth lived in the waters around the city back then. Imagine that. Half. They fed everyone, from the poor to the wealthy. In the 19th century, oysters were New York's most popular fast food. They were sold on the streets like hot dogs are today. Small stalls with signs saying oysters, 5 cents a dozen, stood everywhere. On the Bowery in Brooklyn, near the docks, workers ate oysters with bread and beer, while the rich enjoyed them on porcelain plates with champagne. But as usual, progress brought appetite. The more people there were, the fewer oysters remained. By the mid-19th century, the catches began to drop sharply. People were harvesting oysters faster than they could grow. Then came factories, sewage, and oil. The water darkened. Oysters got sick, and they were banned due to poisoning risks. By the early 20th century, oysters were completely gone. They disappeared from the water, though they still appeared on some menus imported from elsewhere. Nobody realized then how important these creatures were for protecting New York from the forces of nature. Instead, people built massive vertical walls and artificial embankments, thousands of tons of concrete, stones, and other materials. Surely such massive structures could withstand ocean waves. As Hurricane Sandy showed, they couldn't. The shore shrank, the city flooded, and the damage was enormous. The hurricane also showed researchers that if oysters had still been common along New York shores, the destruction would have been much less severe. That's when an active campaign began to restore the population of the very creatures that once filled these waters. A billion oysters. The Billion Oyster Project was unofficially started back in the 2000s, but after Sandy in 2014, it became official and took off fast. Along with it came an incredibly ambitious goal, to have 1 billion oysters along New York's coast by 2035. The story doesn't start in a lab, it starts in regular restaurants. People order oysters, eat them, but the shells aren't thrown away. Every week, special trucks collect them and deliver them to Governor's Island. There, they're dumped in huge piles, thousands of bags that gradually turn into white hills of shells. This is the first storage site for future reefs. The shells have to sit out in the open for about a year. During that time, any leftover organic matter, salt, and bacteria disappear. What's left is a clean, natural material, the perfect primer for new oysters. Then comes the work with live organisms. Large seawater tanks are set up on the island, clean shells are placed inside, and then microscopic oyster larvae are added. The larvae attach themselves to the shells and begin to grow, forming a thin layer of the future reef. This process takes several weeks. The oysters firmly attach to the shells, forming dense clusters. When the young oysters are ready to move, they're placed into nets, containers, and even concrete spheres that help keep the reef anchored to the seabed. The whole setup is then loaded onto barges and sent across the bay to sites near Brooklyn, Staten Island, the Bronx, and Governor's Island. There, volunteers, divers, and project workers lower the structures to the bottom, forming entire underwater sections. The work takes years. Each batch of oysters settles into place, layer by layer, building up the reefs. The scale is already huge today. In just 11 years since the official launch, more than 2 million pounds of shells have been collected, and about 140 million oysters have been returned to the bay. This isn't just scientists' work. Thousands of New Yorkers join in. School kids wash shells, students help with tanks, and volunteers sort and pack the finished material. There's something symbolic about it. The metropolis that once thrived on oyster reefs is now rebuilding them by hand. Not for food as it did a century ago, but for its own survival against nature's power. The coast under protection. It's hard to believe that a tiny creature could be the hero of a city's survival story, but oysters are experts at it. Each oyster block placed underwater isn't the final structure. Small, free-floating larvae settle on it and grow into oysters. One after another, hundreds of thousands of larvae attach, turning a small block into a solid oyster wall. And it's stronger than it looks. Such a wall can withstand waves that would normally destroy anything soft in their path. So what happens when the tide hits the shore? The wave doesn't crash directly into sand or concrete, it meets the oyster reef. And that's where physics comes into play. When water hits the rough, porous surface of the reef, it loses speed and power. The wave's energy dissipates. It's like trying to sprint through thick bushes. You can't move with the same speed. The same happens to the wave. It breaks, weakens, quiets down. Once the wave loses energy, it can no longer wash away sand or erode the shore from below. That's the main defense against erosion, reducing the power of the water. Essentially, oysters do the same job as engineered structures that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, like breakwaters made of concrete blocks or boulders. Moreover, reefs create calm zones behind them. In these areas, the water slows down and everything carried by the current, sand, silt, tiny particles, starts to settle. So instead of eroding, the shore actually grows. Inch by inch, year by year, new land begins to grow. The more oysters there are, the stronger the reef becomes. It grows upward and outward, following the shape of the seabed, softening the waves, protecting the shore from erosion. You could say oysters do what no engineering project ever could. They turn the clash line between land and sea into a soft, living barrier. Oyster reefs are also a great solution because they don't need people with tools and reconstruction plans. They repair themselves. When a storm breaks part of the reef, young oysters simply attach to the old shells and the hole closes up like a wound on skin. It's not concrete that cracks and crumbles with time, it's a living organism, capable of healing. Oysters don't wait for budget approvals or contractors, all they need is time and salty water. Over time, the reef only gets stronger. Every new generation of oysters adds another layer, building up a natural fortress. The stronger the sea, the more incentive the reef has to grow and toughen. It's a rare case where protection doesn't age but rejuvenates. Instead of falling apart, it renews itself, staying a faithful shield between the ocean and the city. Now imagine this. A fish looking for a place to feed, breed, and live spots an oyster reef. It's the perfect location. Small fish, crabs, and marine worms settle between the shells, a whole neighborhood for sea life. More plants, algae, and seagrass appear, all working as a natural anchor, keeping sand and silt in place. The denser the underwater greenery, the less currents drag the bottom material around, which means the shoreline grows more stable. It's a chain reaction. Oysters create the reef gives life to the ecosystem, and the ecosystem strengthens the shore. It's as if nature itself invented an insurance policy against destruction. Everything works together. No blueprints or pumps, just millions of small creatures doing their job, and in the end, New York gets a strong, living defense against erosion that grows stronger every year. Water purification. Yes, the city's saved from the ocean that's always trying to bite off another piece of New York, but coastal waters carry another danger: pathogens and filth. Sometimes the water's murky, with the smell reminding everyone that a dense city lives just nearby. Each year, about 20 to 21 billion gallons of sewage pour into it. And that's no calculation error, it's because of an old system. Storm drains and sewers share the same pipes. When it rains, they overflow, and the city literally breathes through its manholes. The water isn't full of chemicals or oil, but of organic household waste, feces, grease, food scraps, paper, hair. Everything flushed down millions of toilets and sinks. Once in warm water, all this quickly decomposes. Bacteria feed on it, produce hydrogen sulfide, and the water starts to smell. Not like the sea, but like something rotten. Dense layers of sludge mixed with organic remains form on the bottom, and when stirred up by waves, they color the water a murky green or brown. In summer, the smell grows especially strong because heat speeds up decay. In some places like the Lower East River or Gowanus Canal, bacterial levels exceed safety norms tenfold. After a rainstorm, they spike instantly and the water basically turns into a thick soup of microbes and urban waste. And once again, oysters come to the rescue. They're natural filters, quiet cleaners of the underwater world. They don't move or fuss, they just exist and do the work that keeps New York's waters from turning into sewage. Each adult oyster filters up to 50 gallons of water a day, about the size of a big bathtub. An oyster pulls in water, runs it through its gills, and releases it cleaner, free of suspended matter, organic debris, and other city junk washed into the bay after rain. Millions of oysters on the bay floor act like a giant filtration system, only without pipes or power plants. They remove suspended particles, bits of organics, silt, leftover plankton, all the stuff that makes water murky. Instead of settling and rotting, these particles become oyster food. When the water clears, light returns. Seagrass, algae, mosses start to grow again. All that greenery that holds sand and silt, keeping currents from sweeping them into the ocean. The plants, in turn, provide shelter for fish and crabs, which help mix and stabilize the seabed. It's another chain reaction. Oysters clean the water, plants strengthen the bottom, and the whole ecosystem becomes more resilient. And most importantly, oysters do this nonstop. They don't need pumps, filters, or electricity. They don't tire, break, or wait for orders. They just live and keep the balance the city doesn't even care about. Thanks to them, the murky waters along New York shores slowly lose the sewer smell and start to resemble the sea again. But humans have learned to pollute water so badly that cleaning it's almost impossible, especially in a city of 20 million people. Scientists have found that the waters around New York hold at least 165 million plastic particles at any given moment. On the east side of Manhattan, in the East River, the concentration can reach 556,484 particles per 0.4 square miles, twice the average across the bay. Oysters help with this too, but with a catch. They're filter feeders, and they don't really care what passes through them. Clean water with plankton, polluted water with organics, or water full of microplastics, it's all the same. The problem is, oysters can't digest microplastics. They just trap them, and then the particles fall to the seabed. Still, that helps. The pollution disappears from the main water column and gets buried in the sediment. Seems like everyone's happy. But studies show that oysters in New York Harbor contain plastics in their tissues, meaning part of it stays inside them. Scientists don't yet know what that leads to. There's not enough long-term data, but most likely nothing good for these little defenders of New York. They literally sacrifice themselves to make the city's water cleaner. Oysters have rivals. Unfortunately, oysters alone won't cut it. Even 1 billion of them wouldn't be enough to provide 100% protection for New York's shoreline from erosion, so sand and grass step in to help. Along the coast, salt marshes are being restored, those wet zones where salty and fresh water meet. Here they plant vegetation that can handle the tides, like Spartina alterniflora seagrass. Its roots work like a natural net. They hold the soil together, stopping the waves from washing the shore away. And when a storm hits, the marsh soaks up the water like a sponge, then slowly releases it back into the ocean. For the city, it's like a natural drainage system, only without pipes or pumps. Bringing a salt marsh back to life takes time. First, they bring in soil, then plant the seedlings, and after a couple of seasons, the spot that used to be a wasteland starts breathing again. Birds, fish, and crabs return, but that's just a side effect. The important thing is the shoreline stops drifting away. Waves no longer crash straight into the land. They lose their power in the thick greenery. It's not just a swamp, it's a quiet, patient barrier between the city and the sea. And then comes the Sandy line of defense. On the Rockaway Peninsula in Queens, for example, Hurricane Sandy literally flattened the dunes. Where beaches once were, the ocean cut straight through. And that's a disaster because dunes are a vital part of the city's protection line. They might look like simple sandy hills with sparse grass, but they're what keeps the shore from sliding underwater. When tides, storms, or strong winds come, dunes take the blow. They absorb the waves' force, slow the water down, and stop it from reaching city streets. Most importantly, they keep the sand from being washed away. Without dunes, waves would just keep washing the coast away piece by piece until it's gone. The grasses that grow on dunes are real anchors. Their roots weave into a tight network that holds the sand in place. When the wind brings in new layers of sand, the roots lock them down and the dune grows taller and wider. Water can't easily break through, it just seeps in and drains back to the sea. If a storm is especially strong and some of the sand does get washed away, nature quickly restores it. The wind brings more sand, the grass spreads, and the dune regains its shape. It's a flexible system. It doesn't crack like concrete, but adapts to the elements. Restoration follows a simple plan, but it takes immense patience. First, they bring in sand, forming long ridges along the coast. Then everything is reinforced with plants, usually hardy coastal grass that loves salt, wind, and sun. It's planted by hand, strictly according to a pattern, row by row, so the roots weave evenly. In a few months, the grass takes hold, and after a couple of years, the dune starts to live on its own. The wind piles more sand on it, and the barrier grows naturally. Today, miles of dunes have already been restored along New York's shores. They now take the blows of the ocean again, protect the streets, and keep the coastline from eroding. During heavy storms, some sand might wash away, but it stays within the system and later returns. These aren't just hills, they're a living, breathing shield that moves with the sea and keeps New York afloat every single day. Multi-layered defense. And even that doesn't guarantee the city's safety during the next hurricane. And if it's even stronger than Sandy, well, after 2012, New Yorkers began turning their city into a fortress. The most obvious protection is seawalls and breakwaters. On Staten Island, a massive coastal dam is under construction, almost 5 miles long. Its height reaches 13 feet, and it's meant to hold back storm waves that used to sweep everything away. Inside, there will be pumps and valves that automatically push excess water back into the ocean when the level gets too high. In other areas, walls are built in steps, so they look like part of the waterfront with benches, greenery, and walking paths. Along the East River in Manhattan, an even more ambitious project is underway, the East Side Coastal Resiliency. It's an entirely new waterfront zone being literally raised several feet higher. Under the lawns and pathways, there'll be drainage and filtration systems. When a storm comes, this whole area will take the hit, hold back the water, then slowly release it into the river. On normal days, it's just a park. People stroll there, unaware they're standing on a giant shield. For extreme storms, engineers also came up with movable barriers, huge metal gates that close like shutters. They sit at river mouths and canal inlets, nearly invisible in calm weather, but when a storm warning comes, the gates drop, blocking the water. This protects underground utilities and the subway, which used to flood even after heavy rain. But New York isn't just defending itself from the sea. The problem is that water also comes from below, through sewers, basements, even subway tunnels. That's why older neighborhoods are now getting special backflow valves that keep seawater from coming up through the pipes. On the streets, there are smart drains and small green patches where rainwater can collect. There, it filters through the soil and seeps down instead of rushing straight into the sewers. It's cheap, simple, and effective. Blooming roofs. Still, one of the city's main goals is to do everything possible to preserve oyster reefs, the best natural defenders around. And that's where grass on rooftops comes in. If you think that sounds too simple, then take a look at this. A quiet green island floating above Manhattan. It's the roof of the giant Jacob K. Javits Convention Center. Once just bare glass, metal, and concrete, now it's covered with a thick carpet of grass, moss, and low shrubs. The roof spans about 290,000 square feet, making it one of the largest green roofs in the country. The plants here weren't chosen by chance. They're hardy species who know how to survive in the wind and scorching sun. Among them are sagebrush, thyme, several types of wild grasses. Together, they form a dense cover that doesn't need constant watering and can handle sharp temperature changes. Beneath that carpet lies an entire engineering layer: soil, drainage, membranes, filters. Rainwater doesn't just run off, it soaks into the soil and roots like in a sponge. Then slowly, bit by bit, it goes away. Some evaporates, some seeps through. Standing on this roof, it's hard to believe that beneath your feet isn't a lawn, but a massive convention hall hosting car shows and tech expos. In the mornings, fog rolls in. Bees buzz in the summer and seagulls rest after a flight. Scientists have counted over 5,000 birds visiting this place each year, and ecologists have already documented dozens of insect species. What used to be an empty surface has become a living corner of the ecosystem in the middle of a glass city. But this green carpet doesn't just look good. It helps protect New York from another disaster like Hurricane Sandy. When the storm dumped hundreds of millions of gallons of water on the city, the drainage system failed. Everything that could flow ended up in the subway, basements, and streets. Now, roofs like this act as flow breaks. A green roof can hold up to 1.8 million gallons of water a year, about as much as 7 Olympic pools. And all this happens naturally, no pumps, no machines. As a result, oyster reefs receive fewer polluted runoffs, one of the main reasons the city's defenders struggle to survive in nearby waters. And this isn't the only project, just the most striking one. In Queens, for example, nature has literally climbed on top of the parking lot on the roof of the Skyview Park complex. Where cars once stood, there's now a 54,000 square foot green expanse. And in Brooklyn, on top of old warehouses, lies Brooklyn Grange, a huge green stretch the size of a few city blocks. There they grow basil, tomatoes, flowers, keep beehives, all of it several dozen feet above the ground.